Steve. With Steve, the love of my life and my soulmate, I finally broke my recurring pattern of disastrous relationships with eye-catching, flawed geniuses who were initially exciting but ultimately detrimental to my development. Steve and I first met in our early 30s when I was working at the British Embassy in Oslo, and he was the Chief Petty Officer on the Royal Navy ship HMS Glamorgan. When Royal Navy ships visited Oslo, those of us working at the embassy were always invited to parties held on board, and the visit of HMS Glamorgan in 1985 was no exception. At first, I was reluctant to attend, but my colleagues at the embassy said, "Come on, Trish, it'll be fun." So I went, but then decided that it was a mistake because it was really not my scene. So there I was, sitting on a bench, watching everyone else dancing and starting to get bored, when the door on the other side of the room opened and Steve walked in. Our eyes met across the room and zing, zing, zing. It was one of those moments of instant recognition when time stood still and the world spun crazily around us. But we were oblivious to everything except each other. It was love at first sight. After that, we spent the evening dancing and chatting non-stop. It was like we had always known each other. HMS Glamorgan was in Oslo for 3 days, and we spent all our spare time together, going for walks in the forest and visiting Oslo's famous Vigeland Sculpture Park. But we were both married at the time, and we knew that when the ship sailed, we would not be able to pursue any sort of relationship. I was completely devastated when Steve sailed away, and I pined for him for years. What I did not realize at the time was that he was equally devastated. You should also remember that when we met, mobile phones and the World Wide Web did not exist, so keeping in touch with people was much harder in those days. Fast forward to 2006, several months after Alex's dad died. I signed onto a website called Friends Reunited, mainly to re-establish contact with my old school friends after moving back to the UK. I was idly entering names and searching for people when, on an impulse, I keyed in Steve's name, and to my huge surprise, an entry for him popped up, informing me that he was divorced, retired from the Navy, and working as an installation manager. My heart nearly leapt out of my chest. "Ooh," I thought, "Steve's divorced." I then spent the next 4 years writing and deleting an email to him because I did not have the courage to send it. During the intervening period between first meeting Steve and finding him again, I had moved on and thrown myself back into my life. I had persuaded myself that it was enough for me to simply know that his soul existed in the world, and that was a very comforting thought which helped me through some difficult times. I somehow intuitively knew that our souls were inextricably linked throughout eternity, and I always had the feeling that we would meet again later on in life when the time was right. I made the decision to press the send button on my first long-distance walk when I was dancing my way along the Cleveland Escarpment in the foulest weather I have ever experienced. See my coast-to-coast walk for more information about that. During our walk, I had previously confided in my sister about my feelings for Steve and my hesitation to try contacting him, and she had said, "Just do it. Life's too short to dither. What can you lose?" But still I hesitated. What if he was old, bald, and fat? What if he was in another relationship? What if he was simply not interested? So it was not until November 2010 that I finally pressed the send button, and Steve's response was instant. This is what he wrote. Trish, there must be some serious magic going on, as I don't check or use Friends Reunited for months or years on end, and totally ignore the Friends Reunited emails. I am thrilled to hear from you. Feel all teenage excited, I think. Just about remember that far back, but definitely remember Oslo. How could I ever forget or want to? We then spent a week excitedly exchanging messages and photos, and Steve drove up to meet me the following weekend. When he arrived and I answered a doorbell, it was like all those years had simply dropped away. Once again there was a mutual zing, zing, zing of instant recognition and attraction, and we haven't looked back since. We often wonder what would have happened if Steve had jumped ship back in 1985 to be with me, like he wanted to, but realised that it wasn't our time then. Steve would not have been present to see his own children grow up and flourish, and I would not have had my wonderful son, Alex. Steve is very good for me. He allows me to be myself and is very supportive of everything that I do. We have never had an argument because we are always completely in tune with each other and allow each other to be the individuals that we are. We never try to change each other because there is nothing that we would want to change about the other one. Although he is not a pagan himself, Steve is fascinated by my witchy ways and is deeply sensitive in his own way. Somehow he helps to keep my feet on the ground. I do have a tendency to get carried away on my various flights of fancy, without being intrusive or a killjoy. He has a great sense of humour and is always making me laugh. He is my rock, and he can immediately get to the bottom of any problems that arise and find good solutions in all situations. After he left the Navy, Steve started working for a private company which works on Navy contracts, and consequently he travels a lot to ports all around the country and even the world. Singapore, Scandinavia, Malta and Gibraltar are some of the places we've been. He travels with his team of installation engineers. This has been brilliant for me because I often accompany him on his travels and go walking while he is working on a ship or submarine somewhere. He and his crew have been inveigled on numerous occasions into acting as my Sherpas on my various long-distance trails and driving me to and from the start and finish of some of my more inaccessible walks. It is almost like the universe provided me with this extra bonus of having Steve and his team to aid me on my walking quest. What more could a girl want? Naked Rambling. This is one great example of Steve's zest for life and boyish sense of fun and adventure. One summer evening, we had been out to supper with some friends who live in the woods not far from our home. When we left, slightly inebriated at around 2 o'clock in the morning, it was a balmy night and the stars were twinkling in the clear moonlit sky. We drove down the road. I was actually well within the legal limit for driving, but Steve wasn't. And then Steve said, "Let's get out and go for a walk." So we stopped the car and headed off into the woods. It was totally magical strolling through the woods in the middle of the night and listening to the owls. Steve tripped over and fell in a ditch, and we both collapsed with laughter as I struggled to pull him out. It was like a scene from a comedy film. He then started stroking the trees and talking to them. My big, strong, hunky, boisterous sailor man doesn't often display his sensitive side, but give him a few drinks and the facade drops. The next thing I knew was that Steve had headed back to the car, was taking off his clothes, folding them up neatly and placing them on the roof of the car. He said, "Come on, Trish, take yours off too, this is fun." Well, I didn't need much persuading, and we then spent the next half hour dancing on the road and in the woods in the moonlight. It was the most liberating feeling. There is nothing like getting your kit off and feeling the warm night air caressing your skin. My pagan soul was in its element. After a while, we decided that it was probably time to go home, but we couldn't be bothered to get dressed again, so we stuffed our clothes on the back seat and drove home naked. Just imagine if we'd been stopped by the police. Since then, we have developed a penchant for naked rambling, but only when the conditions are right. Weasels. Weasels also feature in our relationship. Steve first introduced them to me when he wanted to sneak some extra time off work, and he informed me that he had a weasel. "What do you mean?" I asked. He replied, "It means that I have a cunning plan. It's so cunning that you could put a tail on it and call it a weasel." Apparently, this is a quote used by Baldrick in the popular TV series Blackadder. So now we always refer to our cunning plans as weasels. Magic really happens. Steve and I got married on the 29th of August 2015.